This is the Conscious Productivity Podcast, and I'm your host, Stephanie Woodward. This is where we're going to talk about your ambition and your drive and how to honor your ambition and drive without losing yourself in the hustle. It's about making the shift from unconscious productivity to conscious productivity. I am thrilled that you're here, and let's jump right in to today's episode. Welcome back to the Conscious Productivity Podcast. I am Stephanie Woodward, your host. And have you joined us on YouTube? Have you watched the video version? If you are here on YouTube with me right now, hello. Thank you for being here. If you are listening to the audio, if you are on a walk in the car, that is fabulous too. I listen to most of my podcasts on a walk or in the car, so I can envision that all of you listening from wherever you are. Do check out the YouTube video and let me know what you think, because I've said this on the last 2 episodes. It is an experiment. I'm doing 6 episodes over the summertime. So bi-weekly, 6 episodes. I think episodes 31 through to episodes 30, what would that make it, 37, are going to be available in video format. And then I'm going to make a decision. Let me know. Do you watch it in both? Do you like to just listen? Do you like to watch the video? And that will help me decide whether to continue doing it in this format. I do love the idea of being in your living room with you, pretending we're having a coffee together, chatting about these topics. And I have to say, I also love the idea of us being on a walk together or in the car on a drive together as you're listening to this as well. So truly no preference on my end, but I am very curious. Send me a note, send me a DM, send me an email letting me know how you are taking in this content. So let's dive into this episode 33, and we are talking about the conversations that leaders avoid. And this is something, does it come up often? Some of these patterns that we're going to talk about today, some of these conversations do come up quite a bit. And I hear this a lot from my leaders. And so I'm saying that because I really want to normalize this, that sometimes having difficult conversations can feel really challenging, and we just want to avoid them. That is completely natural and completely normal. I want to normalize that. And I also do want to be really honest and put forth a bit of tough love here to say you have to have these conversations, even if you don't want to, even if they feel awkward or you're worried they're going to feel awkward, even if they feel tough. This is part of the job. This is part of the job of being a leader. And that is really going to be the key nugget that I want you to take away from today. Sometimes we think that avoiding these conversations makes us kind, or having these conversations makes us mean or harsh, or we're going to hurt people's feelings. I am hoping to change that lens or perspective that you might have already. And I'm going to say, if you are avoiding these conversations that we talk about today, you're actually avoiding your job as a leader. And that might sound hard to hear, but I want to be really direct and respectful and just say, this is what you are paid to do as a leader, is to have these conversations. It can be a cop-out to not have these conversations. So that is how we're heading into this today, to talk about these top 7 patterns that come up that lead us to avoid these conversations. And we'll talk about how to step into them, even if those are the patterns that you're facing or how you're feeling about having these conversations. So I want to start, I think this is where I want to start. I want to start by talking about the 2 emotions that come up most often when it comes to having conversations with team members, or having conversations with colleagues, or having a difficult conversation with your boss. All of these conversations that can feel hard, the ones we avoid the most, there's usually 2 emotions that are going on. We're either feeling some fear. So a lot of the managing up difficult conversations that we avoid, we often avoid those out of fear. Fear of not being seen as a team player, fear of pushing back on a boss who maybe doesn't like to hear the word no, fear of career consequences. You know, if I give this pushback, or if I give this feedback, is that going to be held against me? Is it going to limit my advancement? Very real. These can be very real fears. Sometimes those fears are warranted. We'll talk about that. Sometimes bosses don't want to hear no. Sometimes saying it might have a real cost. So we'll talk about that. So that fear can come up. Fear can also come up in having conversations with our direct reports. We might be a bit, truly, some people are very fearful of what can be perceived as conflict. So sometimes having a feedback conversation, if you're someone who naturally by personality really doesn't like conflict, it can trigger a lot of fear entering into these conversations. So that can show up too with managing down. But what I often see with conversations that leaders avoid when it comes to managing down, so performance conversations, feedback conversations, talking about mistakes that might have been made, it will often be driven by guilt. I don't want to be the one to deliver bad news. I don't want to hurt someone's feelings. We can feel guilty. Maybe I'll just, put this off for another day, or we'll rationalize it away. They're usually pretty good. Maybe this is going to be a one time thing. Um, or maybe I should have said no to this extra workload, so I'll just absorb this extra work, and so we end up taking it on as a leader, because we don't want to download work onto the team, or we don't want to hurt their feelings by sharing how they can improve their work, so you might end up absorbing it as a leader. You don't want to give the feedback, so you do it. You don't want to make the call on something, so you just wait and you don't have that difficult conversation. So on the inside, you may be saying, "I don't avoid these conversations, Stephanie. I just don't want to let my team down, or I don't want my team to feel bad, or it's a really busy season. Now's not the time to have these conversations." So that can be guilt, and those managing up, it can be fear. So as with all of these episodes, and whenever I'm talking about these topics, I hope you never leave these conversations feeling badly about yourself or feeling like, why can't I do this? Or am I a bad leader because I'm not doing this? That is never my intention with these conversations. My intention is always to help you self reflect. We cannot change what we don't notice. And so, this is an invitation in. All of us at different points in our careers, as leaders, have felt nervous to show up for a difficult conversation. Sometimes we don't feel like we know how to do it well. We and then we can naturally avoid it because of that. So I don't want this to have you leaving feeling like I'm a bad leader. I also, though, don't want you burying your head in the sand saying, I'm just going to avoid these conversations. It's finding that middle ground. So I'm hoping today, as we go through this, you can start to notice what's going on for you. So, right out of the gate here, think about some of the conversations you're avoiding. Are you avoiding it out of fear? Are you avoiding it out of guilt? That will be part one of the self reflection, just getting us out of the gate on this topic right away. So notice which emotion tends to show up most for you. And now I want to go through 7 different patterns I see. So, ways in which people will rationalize not having these conversations, patterns of avoidance that I see in these conversations, and I think you're going to see yourself in one or more of these. I know I can see myself in one or more of these too when I'm trying to avoid a difficult conversation. So let's look at these. There are 7. You'll notice if you listen to the last episode, you know that I did a top 7 list last time instead of a top 5. And now I kind of like that extra space to talk about 7 things instead of just 5. But there genuinely are 7 avoidance patterns that I see in these conversations. So that's what I will take you through now. Pattern number 1, and this is definitely the most common one that I hear when it comes to giving performance feedback or, mistakes that somebody on the team is making. We will avoid giving them feedback. This is the number one pattern I see. We'll say, it's just faster if I do it myself. Hands up, have you ever heard yourself say that? I know I have heard myself say that in my career as a leader at different points in time. It is just faster if I do it myself. This is the efficiency lie, and it is the most common pattern that I hear, the most common, dare I say, excuse that I hear for not giving tough feedback. You tell yourself it's going to take less time for me to just do it myself. By the time I book time to talk to this person, and they go back in and fix it, I could have finished this, within 10 minutes, got it over the finish line, easy peasy, no problem. So we tell ourselves that. And so I will say, this will be true the very first time. So, the very first time you notice some kind of performance issue or some kind of mistake that's happening, absolutely, it will be faster in that moment for you to do it yourself and not have the conversation. However, this is a really big but. this will turn into the work that you will have to keep doing over and over and over and over again. You will find yourself 3 years later still doing that work because you haven't had the conversation to grow that individual, to offer correction to that individual, to share feedback with that individual, to help them actually learn how to do it the way that it needs to get done. So, that idea that it's faster to do it yourself, I'm going to challenge you on that and say it's only faster that first time. And all it does is adds extra work to your plate. And you're not doing the respectful thing to share with that individual how they can improve their performance and reach their full potential. So, that's what I'm going to say about pattern number one. It's just faster to do it myself. Pattern number two, I don't want to hurt their feelings. This is the second most common one I hear. And this is usually coming from a really well intentioned place, a really compassionate place. Usually, folks who have high empathy often have this reaction as well. I don't want to hurt their feelings. And this is that guilt piece that can show up in its purest form. You care about this person. You maybe are saying to yourself, I know they're trying their best. I don't really want to demoralize them. I don't want to hurt their feelings. I don't want to make them feel bad. So you either avoid the conversation entirely or you soften it so much that the message becomes really, really vague and isn't actually that clear. Um, so, the biggest thing I want to say about this pattern is notice you are making a very big assumption by saying, I'm going to hurt their feelings because I'm giving them feedback. So, this might assume that we are going to deliver feedback in a really mean or cruel kind of way. There are so many different ways to provide feedback and to have these conversations. I want you, if this is something that really impedes you being able to have these conversations, remind yourself that kindness and directness are not necessarily opposites. They're not necessarily um, mutually exclusive. We can be kind and we can be direct at the same time. Now, you may not feel very skilled at that. Maybe you don't believe that to be true. Maybe you haven't experienced that as true. But I want you to just open your mind up to the perspective that there is a way to do this where you can be kind and you can be direct and have this conversation and share feedback really honestly. Um, Vagueness, when we're vague or when we over soften the message or we avoid this entirely, I would actually say that can feel like kindness, but it's actually the opposite because you're not treating that person like a fellow adult in this relationship. You're not giving them the grace or the ability to make this correction or to grow in their career or to grow in this task. They may simply not know that they're off the mark on something. And so thinking you're going to hurt their feelings by having this conversation, I want you to offset that by saying, imagine if you hold them back in their career growth. That's going to hurt their feelings a heck of a lot more. If down the road, they're not able to meet that promotion goal or they're not able to get to that next level of performance because they haven't had that ongoing feedback. So I want to offset this idea that you're going to hurt their feelings and I want to put a pin in this idea that you can be kind and direct and honest all in the same conversation. We're going to talk about that at the end of the episode. Pattern number 3 that I see, I don't know how to have these conversations without being harsh. So that last pattern, I said my leaders and my folks who are really high in empathy often don't want to hurt feelings. My leaders and folks who are very aware of their natural bluntness or their natural directness, they recognize they're like, I probably will be harsh. I've tried this before and, I come off mean or I feel like I'm harsher than I want to be. So I don't know how to do this without being harsh. So this is more of a skills gap. This is where a leader might say, I genuinely don't know how to step into this conversation. You're telling me that I can be kind, Stephanie, and I can be direct, but that hasn't been my experience. Typically, when I step into these conversations, I hear myself and I sound harsh or I sound meaner than I intend to be. So this could be because you haven't seen it modeled well. So sometimes we've only ever seen feedback delivered in a way that is it's almost like a leader loses their temper. They get to the end of their patience and suddenly they're angry about something or it's in the heat of the moment. And the way they end up delivering it is from a place of impatience or frustration or anger or reactivity. If that's been modeled to you, you might think that's the only way to deliver feedback. Or you've been in situations where somebody has just never given you feedback. They've avoided it entirely and they've stayed really silent. So you start to think you either have to stay silent or you need to be a jerk. And there is, I will say, a third option. Like I mentioned before, If you feel like become a little too blunt, a little too harsh, at the end of this episode, we're going to talk about how to step into these conversations skillfully so that you can balance being direct without being blunt or harsh, being kind without being vague or overly soft and missing the message entirely. Pattern number 4, this one comes up a lot as well, and this might sound like one of our earlier patterns, but I do find it to be different. So this one, pattern number 4, is I don't have time for this. So remember, our first pattern was it's faster if I do it myself. That is an efficiency lie that we tell ourselves. Like, I just might as well do it. It's going to be faster. I'm going to give some tough love on this one. The I don't have time for this pattern. This means that what you're really saying is, I don't have the time to do my job, to be a leader, because giving feedback and having these conversations is your job as a leader. And it is something that you need to make time for. If you think you don't have time for this, then you are probably overdoing the actual work, behaving perhaps more like an individual contributor than like a leader. So, and that might have sounded a bit harsh. It could also mean that you've got massive workload going on and you're going to say to me, Stephanie, I actually don't know where I'm going to fit this in with all of the workload. I will argue that having these conversations takes precedence. As a leader, you need to make time to have these conversations, learn to do it skillfully. And as you start to do this more and more often with your teams, as you start to have feedback conversations more often, you will start to be able to do kind of micro feedback moments. So you can have 10-minute conversations or 15-minute conversations. Sometimes we think we need an hour to have a feedback conversation, and that is not necessarily true. Usually, when we have to take that much time to give feedback, it's because we haven't been giving feedback along the way. So suddenly it becomes this much bigger feedback conversation than it needs to be. So if you feel like you don't have time for this, I want you to uh, flip the script on yourself and say, as a leader, this is my job. I need to make time for this. So how do I now build this into my way of managing? You got promoted into a leadership role because people trusted you to have these conversations and to grow the team. Think of yourself as a ripple and multiplier effect. You are there as a leader to pay attention to what feedback is needed, how to grow the team, how to develop the team. You having those conversations is going to ripple through. They are then going to learn, absorb that information, and pass it down to anyone they are working with or who works for them. And that becomes a real multiplier effect. And that is your job as a leader. It's not just about your results and your productivity anymore. What you are really doing as a leader is setting the team up for shared results and shared productivity and shared high performance. You can only accomplish that if you are giving feedback in ideally real time. So that's my I don't have time for this response. We have to make time for this as leaders. And if you're struggling with that, or you feel a little bit triggered by that, reach out, let me know, because this is something we can talk about. We can go deeper on this one-on-one and have a conversation about it. But just remind yourself, this is what you're paid for. Leaders are paid to give feedback and grow the team. Pattern number 5 that I'm going to talk about is one that I don't necessarily hear all the time, but when I do hear it, it really can be a block for some people. And that is, what if I'm wrong? So this can feel more like some ego protection. Like, what if I go in, I give this feedback? What if I've missed something? Situations where this might show up is you go in, you go in hot, you deliver the message, you give this strong feedback to someone, strong constructive feedback, and they say, actually, I'm going through a really difficult divorce right now, or actually my child is really, really ill right now, or I'm really ill right now. Something comes up where you think, oh my gosh, if only I'd known that there was this going on in their personal life, I wouldn't have come down this harsh on it. So if that's happened to you once, that can be something that holds you back. Like, what if I'm wrong about this? What if I'm misreading the situation? What if I'm missing some really important information? This is a real worry. And of course, that there can be factors that we just don't know about. So we'll talk about this again at the end of the episode. I'm going to talk about how to step into these conversations, but I'll give you a bit of a spoiler right now. Coming in strong and hot on your constructive feedback and acting as though, I am here to tell you that this is the way it is, and this is what I'm seeing, and this is the feedback. And, that is more blunt than it is kind and direct. So there's a way of entering these conversations where you are just sharing what you're observing. Here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm noticing. And you can invite them into this conversation as well to say, depending on the situation, is there anything I'm missing here? Or how are you seeing it? Or how is this landing with you? In how you show up, you can show up in a way that if they do offer up more information, it's just a natural part of the conversation. So it doesn't feel like you're backtracking or you're having to backpedal on yourself. You'll just say, okay, that explains it. Now, where do we go from here? How can I support you through this time? Right. So there's different ways of entering the conversation that doesn't make it a right, wrong, um, I'm going to get called out or pushback from this particular team member because I've missed something. You can turn this into a conversation, and that truly is the respectful thing to do. I always, if you've worked with me or had me in for a workshop or doing a team program, I'm always talking about these are adult to adult relationships in the workplace. We are talking to fellow adults. And so instead of you coming in strong with this feedback and thinking that essentially that you have this, for lack of a better word, I'm going to say power over this person to deliver this constructive feedback. Really think of it as I'm going into a feedback conversation. I'm offering up what I've noticed, and I'm going to see what they have to say and respond. And we're going to have a conversation about this and what comes next. That can sometimes ease the pressure. And it's also part of the way you can enter into these conversations, showing both compassion and be direct and honest with your feedback as well. Pattern number 6, this is specifically for managing up. Remember, I talked about the fear of pushing back on a boss or pushing back on the board or pushing back on whoever is senior to you. What if that person gets mad? What if my boss gets mad? What if this is career limiting? I'm just going to avoid having this conversation entirely. So this is very much a managing up pattern, the fear of saying no to someone who is more senior to you or in a position of power over you, the fear of pushback if you disagree with the direction or a decision, fear of being seen as not a team player, or that it might be career limiting. Now, I am a realist, so I will say there will be environments where this could absolutely be true, and this fear could be very, very warranted. So there's a couple of things I want to say about that. There are environments that are truly just plain toxic. And that's where talking about psychological safety becomes really important to say, are you fearful because truly your leader, the leadership team is truly resistant to hearing any feedback. They want a bunch of yes people. They want people to agree with them. They're not open to any pushback of any kind. That is probably a podcast. I should do a podcast around that, actually. I don't think I've done a psychological safety episode yet. So I think we'll get to that because that is something in and of itself. If you truly feel like you're in an environment where you can't speak up at all and you cannot provide any kind of very healthy pushback, then we've got a different problem on our hands. And I would say that becomes a conversation. Is this an organization you want to stay at? Is this where you want to place yourself and your career? Is this the kind of environment where you want to be a leader? Because it's going to be really challenging to lead well in an organization like that. So let's park a psychologically unsafe environment over to the side for a minute and come back to just that everyday fear of, oh my gosh, what if I upset my boss? What if I disappoint my boss? What if they don't see me in the same light because I'm saying no, or I have a different opinion on something? This is where learning how to enter these conversations skillfully is really, really important. So if you just go in and offer up a flat out no to your boss on a major initiative or something that's really mission critical to the organization, yeah, that can translate into potentially a lack of judgment where someone might say, do you not realize how important this project is or how important this initiative is? Where's your sense of urgency? Where's your sense of judgment? So that fear can be real, depending how you enter the conversation. So start to think about, how do I want to show that I understand the mission criticality of this? How do I want to understand? How do I want to express that I do have a sense of urgency? I do understand how important this topic is, this task is, this initiative is, and yet I'm really running into some difficulties, or I really have something legitimate from a capacity perspective, from a culture, a workplace culture perspective, um, an interpersonal perspective, or an impact on the team. There's something equally mission critical from a people perspective or a risk perspective that I really need to share with my leader. So those are the kinds of conversations. If you're going to go in and say no or offer pushback, I want you to really be thinking about these things. What's the risk on culture? What's the risk on people? What's the risk to the initiative or the program? but it's a bigger conversation than just saying a flat out no. If you are a leader, you are expected to give more thought to the conversation and the context and show up in a way that demonstrates, yeah, I get that, just saying a flat out no doesn't make sense. And yet I need to renegotiate this with you, or I need us to look at a different way of doing this, or can we approach this differently? Or can this something happen before something else in terms of how we're going to communicate this out to the group? There are a number of different ways where you can demonstrate and actually shine as a leader while also offering some pushback. Because if you are noticing something that is really, really important, um, that can actually build you credibility and build your reputation as a leader by bringing that forward. So I offer that up if it's managing up that you are feeling challenged by. Finally, pattern number 7. This is another one that I don't see all the time, but when I see it, it shows up pretty strongly in how this and how the person feels. This is the like they should know. I shouldn't have to tell them this. They should know they're not making the mark. They're not hitting the mark. They should know that that was inappropriate. Or where is their common sense? So it all fits in that category of kind of saying like, why do I need to be the one to provide this feedback? They should know this. So this is a silent expectation pattern. That's what I like to call it. You think this is so obvious that you shouldn't have to get involved. You shouldn't have to provide feedback on this to begin with. That this other person should just know it. Having to spell it out. Maybe you feel that that's awkward. That feels insulting. That feels unnecessary. Feels maybe like a waste of your time. Coming back to that time piece. Um, but I will say this, they don't know. If they know, either they do know and they are making the choice to keep doing this, and they will keep doing it unless you offer the feedback, or they don't know and it's a blind spot for them, or it's something that they is just not on their radar, and so they do need that feedback. So it's one or the other. Either you're right and they do know, but they either think it's okay, or it's a habit and they're just going to keep doing it unless someone interrupts that pattern, or they don't know and they do need you to spell it out for them and have a conversation with them about it. So I would say with this one, it's how you approach the conversation. If you come in with that attitude of like, you should know this, that's not going to set the conversation up for success. You want to come in and again say, here's what I'm noticing, here's what I'm seeing. Can we talk this through together? And so it's showing up with that compassion and that directness. Most people don't know. I will say that when you think they know, most of the time they don't know, or they don't think it's an issue, or it was something that maybe was tolerated in a previous work environment, and it's not part of the current culture or the current work environment. So you're unpacking patterns and habits with them is usually what shows up when this pattern shows up. Okay, we have covered the 7 patterns that I see that lead to avoiding certain conversations. So I want you, again, this is another reflection point in the episode. Did you see yourself in any of those? I know for me, the time piece would show up. And also I tend to have a lot of empathy. Sometimes I can over empathize. So when I was early in my career, that fear of hurting people's feelings, I don't want them to feel bad. I had a lot of guilt, of downloading work onto the team, or you know what, they're going through a difficult time right now. I don't want to burden them with this extra feedback. I'll just deal with it myself. And I would often say when I'm in my, and that would be when I was more in my relationship frame of mind. When I'm in a task oriented frame of mind, then I would be saying, oh, it's faster if I just do it myself. So I can see myself in 2 of those patterns. I'm curious to know where you see yourself in those patterns. So jot down for yourself or make a mental note which avoidance patterns show up most for you, because I want you to start to notice them. Again, this is not about making you feel bad or having you think, gosh, am I a terrible leader that no, you're not a terrible leader. These patterns show up with everyone. I don't think I've ever come across anyone in leadership who hasn't at some point avoided difficult conversations and avoided having certain conversations for one of these reasons at some point. So you are in good company along with all the other leaders out there. The best leaders, however, notice it, pay attention to it. They deepen their self-awareness and they say to themselves, okay, I'm going to recognize when this pattern shows up and I'm going to do something about it, because they recognize there is a cost to not having these conversations. And that's what I want to talk to you about next. By avoiding these conversations, you are costing yourself, the team, and the organization a lot. And so let's get real about the cost of avoiding tough conversations. First of all, especially if there's a performance issue on your team, your high performers will start working around the underperformer. And I'm going to guarantee that resentment will build over time. So your high performers will let someone off the hook early on because they will assume, oh, well, my leader, my boss clearly sees what's going on and they're going to do something about it. So they are all working hard. Your high performers are all working hard. The rest of your team members working hard. If there is a chronic underperformer, they're going to assume you're doing something about it. If you don't do anything about it, or they notice over time this person is getting away with it, they end up absorbing more of the work. So your high performers take on more because they're compensating and nothing's happening. That really, really, really starts to upset your top performers on the team. They will get resentful over time. They will give you grace for a certain period of time, but after a while, they will start to notice, why isn't anything being done? Or we just don't hold high standards around here, and they will move on. They will go to an organization that holds higher standards, or they will move on to an organization where they feel like the playing field is fair and that underperformance is managed and dealt with because they don't want to be absorbing all of that extra work. So you think when you avoid your conversation that you're protecting an underperformer, if that guilt shows up, but what you're actually doing is really demoralizing your top performers and eroding your relationship and credibility with them. And so I do want that to land because when you're avoiding a conversation, that might be the impetus to get you to have the conversation. If you start to think about your high performers and that you're actually letting them down if you don't have these conversations with performance issues on the team. So I hinted there. So that cost number one, that cost like resentment will build with your high performers. I hinted at this in that conversation right there by saying you're going to lose credibility. This won't just be with your team. You will lose credibility with colleagues. You will lose credibility with your own leader because people notice and other teams, other departments will see, wow, they're really letting that person off the hook, or they're not ready to step in and do something about this. Or they might think that you don't think there's a problem and they'll start to question your judgment. Do you actually see that there's a problem here? Or do you have the leadership chops if you can't have these difficult conversations? So, really know this is a credibility piece. Learning to have these conversations well and learning to have these conversations respectfully will actually build your leadership credibility, whereas avoiding them can really erode that leadership credibility over time. Also, what this can cost you, and this will probably sound quite obvious, but if you avoid having these conversations in the early stages of a problem or the early stages, someone joins the team or someone's new to a particular task or new to a role or they're new to the culture, new to the workplace culture, they might not they might not notice if anything's off. And if you don't share that with them, if you're not giving them real time feedback, that can end up becoming a habit. It can become a pattern. And then imagine having to have the conversation at the 1 year performance review mark where you're suddenly saying, yeah, by the way, for the last year, you really haven't been showing up the way I need you to be showing up. That then becomes a really big issue. It's become, first of all, it becomes a way more awkward conversation. I never like people to be surprised in their performance reviews. Performance reviews, they should really expect what's coming. You've either been having really constructive feedback with them throughout the year so they know, hey, I'm not quite hitting the mark here, or they haven't been receiving constructive feedback. They've been receiving positive feedback and they know their work is going well. So they're expecting a good performance review. We don't want to have surprises there. Otherwise, it becomes a really awkward conversation. And also, if you are not correcting mistakes or helping people understand the way the process is supposed to be followed, or whatever the feedback is that you might be avoiding, it's only going to turn into a bigger problem because those mistakes or those ways of working are just going to compound over time. And it's only going to create a bigger problem that you have to deal with later. So I always say, instead of having those big, awkward conversations, have real time conversations, nip it in the bud early, make feedback just a regular part of your leadership practice. You're giving positive feedback, you're giving constructive feedback. It's just part of the way you lead. so that your entire team knows where they stand on an ongoing basis. If you want to avoid those awkward conversations, have them earlier. Nip it in the bud, talk about things regularly and on a timely basis. Celebrate the wins and point out the good things just as often as you point out constructive points of feedback. This cost I spoke about a little bit earlier as well, or at least I hinted at it. You will stay stuck doing the work forever. If you fall prey to that pattern of it's just easier and faster if I do it myself, buckle up to be stuck in overwork for the rest of your leadership life. Because if you are just picking it up for people all the time and you're covering for them or you're protecting them or you just think it's easier, you are going to get stuck in that loop of doing that work over and over and over again. And that is only going to burn you out. That's only going to make you resentful over the longer term, and just contribute to depletion in your overall satisfaction and fulfillment with work. You don't always want to be the one rescuing or covering for or picking up the slack. That's not your job as a leader. So you're actually abdicating your role as a leader, and advocating your job to provide that feedback. And instead, you're reverting to being an individual contributor on the team who's just stuck in the doing. And we want you to be the one supporting people and developing and growing people. And that means having those feedback conversations. I don't want you stuck doing this heavy workload and picking up the slack for everybody indefinitely. Finally, the other cost I want to talk about, you will become the bottleneck for your team's growth. So this is one where if you are someone who really resonates with being empathic and caring about your team members, you are going to rob them of their growth and development. If you are not sharing feedback with them, if you're not having honest conversations with them, how the heck are they supposed to grow and develop? They can't. And so this can be another one if you get fearful of having these conversations or you feel nervous about hurting people's feelings, you will hurt their feelings way more if you get in the way of them growing and developing, if you get in the way of a future career progression or promotion, or you rob them of the feedback they need to show up at their best and show up in their full potential. So trust them to be able to handle the feedback. Trust that you can show up in a way that actually can make feedback be a really positive experience rather than something that is awkward or negative. Let's talk about that. Then I've hinted that at the end of the episode, I'm going to share with you how to show up skillfully for these conversations. And I want to make good on that promise. So, self-reflection point, we've talked about what emotion is showing up for you. Are you feeling fearful? Do you feel guilty? How does that show up? We've talked about the patterns, and hopefully you've identified which of the patterns show up most for you, why you might avoid these conversations. We talked about the cost. I do want you to think about which cost resonates most with you, because if we don't feel that there's a cost to our current behavior or cost to the status quo, it's really hard for us human beings to change. So, um, you might find it interesting to be like, oh, I've identified my pattern. I now better understand why I avoid these conversations. I really want you to anchor into which of the costs really spoke to you. Is it that you don't want to be doing the work and picking up the slack for your team all the time? Is it that you don't want to rob people of their development? Is it that you want to prevent having a bigger, more awkward conversation later? I really want you to think about the cost, because that cost is what's going to be the driver to have you say, okay, you know what? It is worth changing my behavior. It is worth stepping into these tough conversations because it will alleviate that cost. Okay. So, mental note or jot down for yourself if you've got pen and paper nearby or you've got your journal nearby, jot down the cost that is really speaking to you. And now we'll talk about how to show up for these conversations really skillfully. To go deep on this, I will say I run half-day feedback workshops. So I'm not going to be able to take you into all of the details around having feedback conversations. If that's something you're interested in, you can always reach out to me and we can put together a half day, a full day for you and your team to talk about how to step into feedback conversations. But here, I'm going to give you 3 ingredients that will help you step into these conversations immediately. As you close out this app with the podcast, you will be able to step into your next difficult conversation with more skill than before. So, 3 ingredients. And remember, we talked earlier about usually people are afraid of either hurting people's feelings. They're worried about being too harsh, or they feel that they show up too harshly. Others are just too soft. They're too vague. And I spoke about that, not being the respectful way to show up. People don't know that they're getting feedback if it's too vague or too soft. So here is what I want you to blend together when you're having these conversations. First of all, you want to be direct, you want to be honest. So I don't want you sugarcoating things. As soon as you start saying, oh, you know what, it's fine, but it would be really great if you just could, as soon as you start putting that kind of language around it, the person doesn't realize that what you're offering up is something really significant, that you really are sharing some honest feedback with them that you want them to take seriously. So you want to be direct. This is ingredient number one. We don't want to bury the message. I don't want you to have them guess at what you mean. I want you to be really, really clear. Now, direct does not mean blunt. It does not mean mean. It does not mean personal attacks. It does not mean an angry tone. Direct just means, hey, I've got something I want to share with you. I really respect you. I'm really invested in your growth. And so I want to be really honest about something I observed in our meeting the other day, right? That's direct. That's honest. The person is like, okay, I'm about to get some information here. This person respects me. They want me to grow in my role. They've got something they want to share with me about the meeting last week. Great. I'm here for it. And if they're not here for it, you're at least signaling this is what's going to happen next. Okay. So directness doesn't mean mean. It just means being really honest and not hiding or burying what you're trying to say. Direct is also a big form of respect. Remember, adult to adult relationships. Being direct means you're not wasting time. You're actually getting to the point. So you have respect for their time, you have respect for their intelligence, and you have respect for their ability to handle the truth. So direct means I'm gonna give you the information you need to decide what you, the other adult in this, are going to do about this or what you want to do with this information. So direct, if you if you have a difficult time with directness, think about those things. It is a way of showing respect. Direct does not mean blunt and it does not mean mean. Direct just means I'm not going to mince my words. I'm not going to soften or bury my words because I'm making up the fact that the other person can't handle this. Okay, so that's the first piece. Ingredient number one is directness. Ingredient number two is compassion. So when I say compassion and showing up with compassion and empathy and kindness, this is where I don't want you thinking like, oh, here I come in to power trip and tell this person, what they're doing wrong. That's not what this is about. You're not coming in to kind of wag your finger at them or um, that energy of kind of scolding or reprimanding. We don't want that energy here. You want to honor that this is a real person in front of you. And, sometimes hearing things can be hard to hear. So it's not, when we said we don't want to hurt people's feelings, sometimes people's feelings will get hurt. So we'd much rather hear that we're doing a great job than hear that there's something we need to work on. But there's a way of delivering that message that allows them to hear it. And if their feelings are a little hurt in the moment, that's for them to manage to a certain extent. And that's where I said being direct, we're not being mean, we're not being harsh. But if you show up and say, hey, I'm really invested in your growth. Here's what I've noticed. I want to share this with you. And I know, it can be hard to hear this sometimes. I know that. But I also, uh, I really want to make sure you hear this directly in the moment so that you have a chance to work on this before we step into your performance review months from now. Or I want us to talk about this now before it, trickles out into other areas, or this is your first time going through this task and so now's the time to fix it. There's so many different ways, depending on what the situation is. Again, depends. You'll change your language depending, but there's so many ways of bringing that compassion in while also being direct. And so that's what I want you to think about. Compassion will show up in your tone. It's going to show up in your pacing. It's going to show up in your willingness to slow down. You're not going to kind of rush through your message. You're going to let them absorb it. You're going to say, like, do you have any questions? Do you want me to expand on anything here? And really involve them in the conversation. And finally, curiosity, staying curious through these conversations is the other part that's going to be really, really important. And it's something that many people skip. Um, and this is also for remember we said earlier that pattern of like, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm missing some piece of information? What if they suddenly tell me that they have been battling a sickness or there's sickness in their family or they're going through a really difficult time personally? This is where curiosity will really help you. So when you show up for these conversations, you're going to be direct because you're sharing what you've observed, you're sharing what you're noticing. You're going to be compassionate where you're like, hey, I'm invested in your growth. I want to share this with you. I respect you. I know sometimes it can be hard to take this in, but I'm here with you. We're going to talk this through together. Whatever you need to demonstrate that empathy and compassion. Curiosity is where you offer something like, depending on the situation, it could be, is there anything I'm missing here? Or I'm really curious. Um, this is a real sudden change. I used to observe you showing up this way, and now I've noticed a big change in that. So I wanted to check in with you to see what might be going on or what has possibly changed. So think of questions you can insert here to turn this from being a one-way transmission of information. I was just going to say a one-way dialogue, but a dialogue is two ways. A one-way transmission of information into a conversation with that other person. And that's by asking questions, inviting them in, inviting their perspective, getting them to share any additional information or what they might need for support. So you can be curious and bring that into these conversations. And that's going to help you feel really good that even if you are missing some kind of information, it doesn't mean that what you've been observing is incorrect. You wouldn't be having this conversation if you hadn't observed something in their behavior or something in their performance or their results that you wanted to talk to them about. Curiosity allows you to explore context with them and to find out the why behind what it is that you're observing. So, those are your three ingredients. You're going to bring directness. You're not going to mince your words. You're not going to be overly vague or overly soft. You're going to bring compassion and you're going to bring curiosity to these conversations. And that will help skill you to have these conversations with your teams. So, as I've said at the outset, I hope this is just building your self awareness, helping you better understand yourself as a leader, and helping you decide, where do I have some work to do on this front? We all have work to do when it comes to our professional development, our personal development. And so, what's the growth edge for you here? What is a conversation that you've been avoiding that maybe having listened to this, are you feeling better prepared to step into it? And can I challenge you to go and have that conversation? Please go and have that conversation. Anchor into the cost of not having that conversation. Think about directness, compassion, and curiosity, and go ahead and have that conversation with that individual and let me know how it goes. DM me. You can find me over on LinkedIn or on Instagram. You can send me an email, anything to let me know how this is going. And I will say, if you want to go deeper on this work for yourself as a leader, remember I do executive coaching. I do a lot of one on one coaching with senior executives in C suite. I also do a lot of leadership programs and team programs where I come in and work with you and your team on something specific that you really want to work on as a team. I also do workplace culture work. So, wherever you are needing some extra support or you're needing some programming, do reach out. I customize everything for my clients. It's all bespoke. So we really look at, what does your team need? What do you need? What does your group need? And we build from there. If you're interested in doing that, you can head over to agencytochange.com and book a discovery call. It is complimentary and we talk everything through and you get a sense for me and my programs. Otherwise, keep listening to the podcast and you can get your tips and your tidbits here and just let me know how it's going. And please let me know how you're feeling about this video format or whether you're taking this in from an audio format. With that, here's to conscious workplaces. Here's to conscious work. Here's to managing our relationships within the workplace with more attention, more care, and doing work that we love. I do believe that that is possible, that work can support and benefit our well being rather than being a detractor. I will see you in the next episode.